You notice the Fox logo is stretched? They wouldn't let me use anamorphic on this because of the opticals. So I put the Fox anamorphic logo in. John Davis had developed this script. It was sort of the greatest human sort of Rocky meet alien, I guess, was their notion. And I thought, I don't know, I liked the feeling that it was not that far from like King Kong or something like that. It was a pretty simple, straightforward. You know, a bunch of guys go to an island and go deeper and deeper in, and zam, the thing they're chasing after turns out to be a lot bigger than they thought, and they have to turn around and run away. Wow, I haven't seen this movie in a long time. I'd forgotten about this stuff at the front end. It's shot in the front. The spaceship arriving wasn't post production, but it was just one of those things. It was always in the script, and it never showed up until about an hour before the movie was open. And here we are. This is a sort of credit sequence that we made up in Puerto Vallarta. This film was quite a long time. It was the beginning of my career. It was my first studio film. Terrifying in a lot of ways. And a learning experience in a lot of other ways. It's funny, it's one of the first early computer opticals we had to. Arnold's cigar wasn't really lit in that early shot. It wouldn't start or something, but so we had to have the glow enhanced. Remember? And this is Alan Silvestri's music. It's very good. It's very effective for this stuff. I mean, I have to go back and call. Cameraman was Don McAlpine, this was his first American feature as an Australian. I'd seen him do Breaker Morant, and I loved his naturalistic style. And he was wonderful for me because he treated me like, you know, a young second lieutenant, and he was the old sergeant who was protecting him. It was wonderful the way he kind of took care of me and guided me. cast him because I wanted a writer on the set. And I loved his work. And he's got a great wise-ass manner. There's Jesse Ventura. I had no idea. I mean, I found out that the guy was a lot brighter than he pretended to be, and a lot more of a professional. But I was truly astonished to find out that, that he'd been nominated for governor of, what is it, Minnesota? Minnesota. I think this was his first feature. It may have been his only feature. I don't know. You want to know how I really got hired? You want to know the real truth about how this happens? My agent said, look, you want this job? I think you need to sign up with this particular lawyer. It's Jake Bloom's law firm. Jake Bloom is a business lawyer. He looks like Pancho Villa. He's a wonderfully phlegmatic manner, and this looks like an old hippie. Very bright. But his law firm also represented Arnold. My agent was very astute. That 5% was what got me the job. This stuff is day for night, and the shots of the people in the helicopter are on blue screen, and it's troublesome. It's a lot easier to do this sort of stuff now, but at the time, you would just be overwhelmed with the technicians. And the technicians would overwhelm the actors. The whole movie was shot in Mexico, 2 places. Actually, all this stuff is down in Palenque. The second time we went down, all this stuff here that actually looks like it's in the jungle. Now we're in Puerto Vallarta. I can tell by all of the brown leaves. They weren't able to hide the fact that the leaves turned brown. I just had to go and reshoot most of it in. The movie started with a big discussion at the beginning about the location. And McAlpin and I pleaded to shoot it where there was some real jungle. Like this stuff was all real jungle, and it was done in Palenque. And all this stuff. And McAlpin and I pleaded to shoot it there. But there was somebody involved in the production who, it turned out later for corrupt reasons, insisted that we do it in Puerto Vallarta. Said that it would just be wonderful there, and he would make it green and wonderful and blah, 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 blah. And because it was my first feature, I didn't have credibility enough to say, tell him to go to hell. I have never let somebody choose the location for me since. The production designer hadn't done any research had no idea that the trees lost their leaves, that the west coast of Central America is deciduous. And I didn't know at the time to check stuff like that. I mean, I've since learned a whole lot about how much research you got to do on a location and the weather and that sort of thing. But he didn't know anything about it, so 2 weeks in or something, the leaves started dropping off the trees, and he stood there like wondering what the hell happened.
Pick up the trail yet?
Billy's on it. He'd sick of Dylan. That's pretty sophisticated for a bunch of half-ass mountain boys.
I guess they're getting better equipped every day. There were 12 guerrillas.
In fact, the review in the New York Times talks about how there's Schwarzenegger is walking around in a jungle that looks like the woods of New Hampshire in November.
Mean anything to you?
Probably just another rebel patrol. They operate in here all the time.
So all these things we had to build like crazy. I mean, we just was constantly sticking leaves and branches and vines in front of the camera to give it the impression that there was jungle. Most of the time we got away with it, actually. But we keep intercutting like that. We're intercutting stuff that I shot in Palenque, where there were real trees. This is real jungle stuff. All this is real.
Business. Guerrillas hauling 2 guys in the chopper, followed by men with American equipment. Do you remember Afghanistan?
It was very difficult to maneuver in the jungle at all. We just didn't know how. We started with, first day of shooting was the worst nightmare I've ever seen. They had 300 Mexican crew members from Mexico City. Just crowds and crowds of people. And most of them had nothing to do, and we didn't have any way of truly organizing or communicating what we were trying to do. So for the first week or so, there were about 6 of us who were making the movie. And what we did was we negotiated with it's called the Sindicato, the old union down there, which has gotten much better since, but at the time it was filled with these old lifers, guys who'd made movies in the 30s, and they were like, oh. And we got the union to send half of them home. We had to pay them, but we sent them home. So we got it down to a reasonable number of people. I think we had about 100 crew people. Anyway, we got him to send most of these people away, and then we shipped in a bunch of Australians and seated them through the crew as sort of like the non-coms in a military unit. And it worked. It got it so that there was no Mexican crew member who was more than 2 people away from somebody who worked for Don McAlpine, the cameraman. And that became the thread through the center of the movie that communicated information. And gradually, one by one, the Mexican crew started joining the movie, and they'd they'd get a real job as part of the movie and be necessary, and there was some resentment from some of the old lifers who were still there and we hadn't gotten rid of. But they'd gradually get proud of the fact that they were now part of the movie. And eventually we won them all over. This was my first time actually dealing with, particularly was my first time dealing with a real old-time union. As I said, the Mexican unions since have gotten much better, but at the time it was just, ooh, what a nightmare.
Jim Hopper walked through an ambush.
Here is Sonny Landham. In order to cast him, the insurance company insisted we have a bodyguard, not to protect Sonny, but to protect other people from Sonny. This giant, huge man, 6 feet 6 inches tall, not Sonny, the bodyguard, who was assigned to follow Sonny 24 hours a day and always know where he was, to keep Sonny from getting in a fight or hurting somebody. Ah, there's Painless. One of the trips at the beginning of this, when they hired me, they sent me to the armorer. And I was looking around and well, how can I find some toys that are neat? And I saw this thing, this gun. It was supposed to be mounted on helicopters. And in order to make the thing work in the movie, we had to slow it down because the barrel went so fast you couldn't even see it. You couldn't photograph it. It spun. What I didn't know was that there was 100 pounds of batteries standing behind the man when he ran it, and all the ammunition he could carry amounted to 6 seconds worth of firing, even at quarter speed shots. it would bury you up to your ankles in copper shells or brass shells in the 5-second burst that a man could carry enough ammunition for. Because that was the whole issue about how much ammunition can the man carry on his back? How many bullets can he carry? And it turned out it was really only a 5-second burst, which is ludicrous. What the fuck would he carry a thing like that for? It's nonsense. But it's a movie. Who knows? Who knows that he got reloaded? It was just the practical part was that I'm not sure how we mounted it the first time, because we were afraid that they would buck loose on him. And I think we mounted it, hung it overhead from a chain with some safety lines on it. Because what we were afraid of was that it would spin back at him, and it could blind him easily. I mean, even with safety glasses and everything, it just cut the hell out of him. I mean, like, there was, who was it who got killed just from a single blank going off? Well, this thing, if you got too close to the front of it, because they were big shells, they're 30-06 shells or whatever that is, whatever that size is. It's bigger than a 22. I got in a lot of trouble for this shot. It was with a crane and a remote camera. And the studio was all pissed off because it took like 3 hours to get the damn shot. It was very hard to do those things in a jungle location. The attack on the compound was, again, as I said, this was my first studio feature. So the movie had been planned with a second unit to shoot the attack. And the stuff was all shot sort of stuntman style. With static cameras. Yeah, this is that same shot setup was setting up with a crane. The stuff was all, the second unit, I don't know, worked maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And shooting explosions and guys falling into pads and that sort of thing. I think the guy had done a lot of the A-Team or something. And I was probably not a good sport. I didn't really like this stuff. The style of it was just, I don't know, it was just different sort of cinema. You'll see most of the stuff that I was shooting it's more than one shot hooked together, or the camera moves somewhere, or it's one image leading to another image. And the kind of traditional stunt style of shooting is just static cameras. Like this, you just saw it. You watch the guys get thrown out in the background, and you rack focus to Dylan in the foreground. Here, somebody signals Arnold, and you rack focus to Arnold. Now, this is second unit. And you see it's sort of, I'm reluctant to say it. Yes, it's static shot after static shot. I made up this thing about the generator going across. I should be careful. I'm sure loads of people will claim they did it. But in order to break up it used to, in the script, it was, I don't know, they just charging an attack or something like that. And somewhere I saw this truck used as a generator.
Showtime, kid.
Now, the static here, these things are all the second. All the explosions and stuff. All part of the second. This was all shot in the first 2 weeks. Now, no one was hurt on the film. One stunt double for Arnold later on. Ah, there's painless firing. One stunt double for Arnold. Dan hurt his knee. I think we were pretty lucky. Didn't hurt anybody in this sequence. They built the 40mm grenade launcher, the 6-gun arrangement. To some extent, it was a notion that you could develop character or label the guys so the audience would know who they were if some of them had distinctive weapons. But the weapons themselves were unique to the man. Sven, who's an old friend of Arnold's, I worked with him several times. I put him in Red October later on. He was in there a minute ago as the bad Russian who shot the prisoner.
Hit that motor!
Eventually, Jesse was able to aim, but it took a while. It takes a man as big as him just to pick it up, which is why I never fired with that, because Jesse outweighs me by 75 or 100 pounds or something. He eventually got pretty good with it. He could sling it around and pretend that he was blasting whatever. I mean, he could pretend like it was his 6-gun or something, but it took a while for him to get there. Now we get into the stuff that I shot, and the first time they let me do anything that had to do with guns. To do a shot with Old Painless, or at least to show the aftermath of Old Painless, takes hours and hours and hundreds of squid heads. It's not something one wants to do multiple takes on. So you do a take, and if you ask him how long to take 2, he says tomorrow. There was certainly a lot of kidding around about, fine signature lines for Arnold and stuff. The knock knock is obviously out of one of the old cartoons. It's out of a Roadrunner cartoon or something. The stick around that happens just before that came from... There was somebody trying to sell stuff to the studio as a knife maker. A special knife, blah, 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 blah. And I wasn't real impressed with that, but I said, could you make us a machete, which has to do with the jungle? So he made this thing that basically looks like a Thracian short sword, but what the hell? It's Arnold's machete. He gave it to me at the end. I still got it. And the one-liner came from that. The stick around came out of looking at the machete. It was also the way to let him get rid of it. Because otherwise you'd have to carry the damn thing for the whole movie. And it weighed about 20 pounds. It was not a very effective thing as a machete.
Goddamn jackpot.
More than we ever thought we'd...
Now we've got those bastards. I got them. I think this is what you're looking for.
You sheriff. No bullshit. All of it. The cabinet minister, the whole business. Got us in here to do your dirty work.
Look, we just stopped a major invasion. In 3 days, they have to cross the border with this stuff.
Why? Because nobody else could have pulled it off.
Now, this sequence was really what Carl was for. And Carl's strength is what allows Arnold to be plausible here. He'd never done a face-to-face shouting match with somebody else where you actually believed him, where you didn't say, oh, he's a bodybuilder with a great, charming manner, but you actually said, no, he's the character in the movie. And Carl had a lot to do with it. And also part of what I was trying to do here. I mean, Carl was doing it too, but I didn't want Carl. Carl was written as the bad guy, completely just bad guy in the script, and I wanted to turn him around and just say he was a good guy who had a different agenda, and it turns out his agenda was wrong, so that he'd made a mistake, and he felt bad about it. I wanted to put in redemption for him, so they could still fight, but in the end, they respected each other.
Your baggage. You fall behind, and you're on your own. Place is too hot for pickup. They won't touch us till we get over the border. Hey, Billy, give me a way out of this hole. The aerial says we are cut off.
The only way out of here is that valley that leads to the east. I wouldn't wish that on a broke big dog.
Not much choice.
That shot was a dolly with a 180-degree pan in it, which you couldn't at the time get an American cameraman to do. It's just terrible trouble. Because Don McAlpine was Australian and they had a much looser style, I could get him to do a lot. And he loved doing it. You know, like this is another dolly move. Watch this one. The dolly and a sink into... it's two dolly moves. One from each direction.
Why?
Yes, it was a real scorpion. It was a creature which was indeed hurt for this production. But there was only one.
Billy! Back! The other day, I was going down to my girlfriend. I said to her, geez, you gotta...
This joke is Shane's joke. Entirely Shane's joke. Shane didn't write in an official way, but he wrote in an unofficial way, like the joke, the pussy joke. He was just there and he would come up with stuff. Now, the heat vision here, when we first did the heat vision, they had a real heat vision. From the folks in New York City who did the effect stuff. And it was this enormous thing with an umbilical that was 6 inches thick, and it could only get maybe 4 feet from the truck. And it really would see someone based on temperature. But there was this little tiny problem, which was the ambient temperature in Mexico was in the 90s. Consequently, people were the same temperature as the background, and they were perfectly camouflaged. So, in order to deal with that, the splendid folks in the special effect field said, well, there's no problem. We'll put ice water on the jungle, and we'll have the actors stand next to a fire just before the shot. So they literally were doing that, and they spent about, I don't know, a week getting one shot, or maybe two shots. And it was just a nightmare. Every shot cost a fortune. So finally, I went off to a video special effects house. They did commercials and things. And I sat down for about 3 hours. We had to do this in secret. One of the studio post-production guys set it up for me. And we did it behind the back of all the executives and stuff. And the producers. This, right here, was the first shot I shot in the movie. Big, long dolly shot. It took forever. It was silly. But it's spooky looking. But we had to build every bloody leaf. In any case, I went off to a video post-production house that normally did commercials. And I took the film and I had him, regular film, and I had him turn it to a negative, and then we made it all blue, and then isolate certain areas and attach false color to it. And we created most of the special effects, most of the heat effect shots that way. It was a budget issue, but it was also just, it was nearly impossible to get the real heat vision shots. Beginning of the movie, in order to create some sense of, well, one, how you walk around like you're actually in the military or know what you're doing, but also to create some sense of a unit, of a group, like they knew each other. When they looked at each other, they had some history. I had this military advisor guy again, some studio deal, and instead of standing around advising me on what military stuff was about, instead I had him run boot camp for the actors, and do these, marches over a hunk of Mexican backcountry. Take them out on these 4-hour hikes and things, and it did a lot of good. They actually started behaving as if they knew each other, as if they might have been from a unit.
Ni lo intentes.
Elpidia Carrillo, I think, came in after. I'm not sure if she was in the... We didn't send her to boot camp.
Try it again. Please.
There was a certain amount of friendly competition between the actors. And Arnold tends to create that. Create a boys' club and a boys' gym sort of feeling. And see, these maneuvers are what they learned to do from the military advisor. So the guys were going to the gym like crazy, and they were competing about everything. They were competing about how many cigars they could smoke. They were just competing in an odd way. Carl had his own way of competing because he was the most professional of the actors, the most experienced. So, and Arnold would come around at times and just watch. Carl was working when Arnold wasn't, but Arnold was quietly, watching and learning. Obviously, Arnold in this looks a little like the cartoon character Sergeant Rock, and it was something he was talking about doing at the time, and it's sort of, that was, in the end of the movie, we did a joke with Shane Black reading a Sergeant Rock comic book. Yeah, of course, look at him. He looks like Sergeant Rock. The, in effect, rehearsals we had at the military, to the boot camp we had, helped. It helped not just on camera, it probably helped off camera too, because it did make them friends, did make them feel like they were part of a unit, and we probably had far fewer morale problems than you get a bunch of actors together, like Sonny Landham in particular. You can have a crazy time, and we actually had a very easy time.
I guess there's nothing, Major. Please!
These shots with the Predator were our shoot was divided into Puerto Vallarta and then later in Palenque because the first Predator arrived in Puerto Vallarta. It was ludicrous, and we had to kind of regroup, and it also gave me the chance to go move the production to someplace where I could get some actual jungle. But these shots were these early shots of the Predator. I'm not sure where we did them. Actually, I think they were done in Los Angeles. We had, in order to get the Predator, we had to, in effect, make a hole in the jungle, a hole in the background. And so what they did is they dressed a man in a red suit. And I was desperate to try to get him to swing through the trees or do something that didn't just look like James Arness in a thing, stalking around, stiff-legged. And I got some stuff. I had them build this enormous bungee rig, which actually we got a couple of shots out of. I did some other things to get the guy looking semi-mobile in the trees. What I really wanted was a monkey. So I had them make a red suit for a poor monkey. And the problem was the monkey, once we got the red suit on him, that would separate him from the background and they could make the effect out of it. The problem was the monkey was so embarrassed by the red suit that he hid. He'd go up in the tree and he'd cower. And he wouldn't do what monkeys do. He wouldn't go from tree to tree or do anything because he's too damn embarrassed by the red suit. That was one of the back to the drawing board parts of this. The only image of an alien life form that had captured the imagination or looked halfway plausible or functional was the stuff that came from the H.R. Giger illustrations that became Alien. You know, one of those images of the ultimately terrifying other life only shows up once in a generation or more. You're not just going to, hire some cartoonists and say, come up with the next H.R. Giger, because H.R. Giger only comes along, as I said, once in a generation. And I didn't see how you could do anything associated with it without just being a derivative also ran. And frankly, having seen what they did in the sequel, that's exactly what I thought. I thought it was best that they didn't shoot it. Here you see Jesse actually carrying Painless. He had no ammunition at this point. That's why he could carry it. And there's obviously no battery connection. It wasn't operable that way. We shot this in Palenque, where we could get a real snake. The worry was that Painless would buck and get away from him and spin. Even if you had everybody clear out in front for 50 feet, that the man firing it might not be able to control it. And that he could wind up in the way of all of this wadding and bits of brass and stuff that was flying out of the front end of it. So the first time they fired it, they anchored it and yet tried to give him a chance to figure out if he could control it. So it was like bungee cords and things. So that if it started to get out of control, they could yank it in and protect him. But to let him see, what are the concussive forces of what happens when the thing starts spinning. We learned all that there was enough gyroscopic force in the spinning of the cylinder that it kept it online, that it actually was very difficult to move it around or aim it, and that in an odd way it was very safe. You couldn't have it wind up aiming where you didn't want it because it wouldn't move because of all the gyroscopic force and the spin. But it took us a while of experimenting with it, and I think he first tried it out over with the second unit, and it was like half a day. And we kept hearing reports of they're going to fire painless in 45 minutes. Well, no, they've had it. It's like a countdown to the moon launch or something. They're going to fire painless. And I think later that afternoon it fired, and we were about a mile up the valley. I could hear it. And it sounds like it's the loudest buzzsaw in the world. Some people, I guess, were concerned about how impractical it was, but the notion was that painless was it's a movie prop. You know, he never would have used it, but it's a lot of fun to watch. Now here we get Bill Duke to fire painless. You notice he's not walking while he does it. Now, this particular sequence, when I first went to work on this project, I had the feeling that people had a sort of perverse fascination with pictures of guns firing. It was literally almost a pornographic desire. And I said to myself, okay, if you want pictures of guns firing, I'll give you pictures of guns firing. So I created this sequence where they take all of their guns and they blaze away continually for 5 minutes flat. And they flatten the jungle and they mow down everything. And what I was really doing was sort of the Australian phrase is to take the piss out of, or to quietly ridicule the desire to see pictures of guns firing. Now, this is a sort of moral separate piece here. In order to do it, I set up a circumstance where there are no human beings in front of the guns, where, in fact, the point of all the firing was, as the man says, as soon as they stop shooting, we hit nothing. The whole point was the impotence of all of the guns, which was just exactly the opposite of what I believed I was being hired to sell. Studios really are a bit disingenuous in their this movie and some of the ones that followed it really did carry a pornographic desire to market images of gunfire. It was in the corporate purpose. And this was, I wanted the job. So this was my compromise for that. I gave them all the gunfire they could possibly desire. And at the same time, I didn't really advertise to little kids how wonderful guns are. Or at least I thought I wasn't. Now, I did the same thing in the next movie. I created a scene in Die Hard where they blaze away, and you get 5 minutes of guns firing, and all they're doing is shooting at glass. Again, the point was, they're not shooting at people. Now, some of the people involved in this movie have since put that same sequence in just about every movie they make. Every movie they're involved in. With subtle differences. They sort of forget to take the people out of in front of the guns. So you get a sequence where they blaze away for 5 minutes, killing people or images of people. And then, completely act utterly innocent and puzzled when something like Columbine happened. While I was temp tracking the movie, we used some Aaron Copland. I guess I've since learned that the name of the piece is Fanfare for the Common Man. It just got introduced there, and Alan Silvestri later on parodied it beautifully, and we it's playing in the background here. Back in the cutting room, we called it Fanfare for the Common Mercenary. The concept of the blood, I think, was originally orange so that it would show up in the jungle, so it would stick out against the green. But it turned out to be very hard to get to do, and one of the effects guys came up with this glowing liquid, tubes of glow tubes, and we would just cut them open and pour them out on things, and it looked weird and it glowed. And it took much less optical work. So that's how this stuff wound up. It's a common children's toy, and that's why the predator's blood is green instead of orange. The tools that the predator used there are actually pretty common. They're veterinary medical tools. We made up a little medical kit. One of the whole hard problems was to have things that appeared to be alien, and yet you could sort of tell what they were about without having to look. Like they were out of a Star Trek television show or something.
Sergeant! Sergeant! Who get us today?
Bill Duke is a fabulous actor. I love working with him. I believe he went to AFI about 2 years after I did. And then he did American Gigolo. I thought it was just an incredible performance. Hair-raising performance. And that's how I got him in this. Bill in particular is good about developing a scene, because particularly when it's basically mechanics or something, I often try to leave actors the room to develop characters on their own, to be able to shape it and actually give the character a personality, which means you have to give them some verbal license. You can't make them exactly say what the words are in the screenplay. The screenplay becomes a blueprint, and if the actors are good, they'll take the blueprint and play with it and improve on it. And people like Bill are just wonderful for that. I seem to always get caught with this stuff where I've got people speaking another language back and forth, but it's odd. I think actually where it came from was spending so much time watching foreign movies, and I would never read the subtitles. I really didn't care what people said. And I still don't. I get myself in so much trouble with it, because I don't pay attention to what people say. I don't pay attention to what they say on screen. I pay attention to what they look like when they say it and how it sounds. It's sort of part of this notion I've got that movies are really music. They're not plays. They're not photographed plays. They're just a completely separate idea, and that it's much closer to music than it is to the theater. So I guess that's why I often have people speaking in a foreign language, is because if then the audience just hears how they say something instead of what they say.
Let's work! Where
Put your back! Back! Are you? Jesus. Got you, mother. Here. Jesus. You killed a pig. What?
This was not incidentally, even though there was a real scorpion earlier. That pig was so unreal, are you kidding?
Where's the girl?
Major, you better take a look at this. Lane's body. It's gone.
Came in through the tripwires. Took it right out from under our noses.
A lot of folks, this was the first time I'd worked in Mexico, obviously, and a lot of the people in the film got sick. I didn't get sick, but I also, in an effort not to get sick, just didn't eat. And I lost 25 pounds on the movie. The line producer lost nearly 40. He did get sick. He had a real tough time. Arnold got sick. One of the bad stuff is when we were in Puerto Vallarta and, you know, they'd go into town and eat street food. Arnold went to some restaurant that we hadn't checked out. And he wound up playing a scene with an IV bottle in his arm once because he was so dehydrated from the diarrhea. It was some stuff early in the movie. Although you'll notice as the movie goes on that Arnold loses weight. He gets noticeably drawn in the face. It's not from being sick, it's ultimately from precautions for not being sick. You see, like this shot right here, he's very slender. It came from precautions for not being sick, so he'd wind up not eating. I mean, I've since worked in Mexico again and learned how to do it. You just have to take over a restaurant and middle-class Mexicans don't get sick. Montezuma's revenge is nonsense. It's just restaurants that cater to tourists is in a way a revenge. There's a movie with called The Horsel. It's a John Ford movie with John Wayne and William Holden, and they hate each other all through the movie. Holden calls Wayne section hand, and Wayne calls Holden bone cutter or something. And they just insult each other constantly. They fight all through the movie, and at the climax of the movie, one of them says to the other, "Strip your blouse," meaning, let's go outside and have a punch-up. And they do. They have a fist fight right at the climax of the movie. It's wonderful. And in the end, they respected each other. They actually respect each other. And there was a wonderful sort of redemption feeling at the end of the movie, or at the end of the climax after they start to have this fist fight. They get interrupted, obviously, in a fist fight, and it never gets resolved. You can't ever have that fist fight resolved. They got interrupted by the Confederate Army attacking. But anyway, I was looking for that sort of relationship, which is why I turned Carl's character around, and instead of making him just the bad CIA guy, instead made him a good guy who had a different set of instructions. That In terms of the rating, I think we had the normal sort of negotiating from the MPAA about take a few frames off this and a few frames off that. We didn't have like the Bill Duke's death until the very end. We had the shots leading up to it, but we didn't actually have the big splat.
No sport.
There are a number of scenes in the sequel that were things I campaigned like crazy not to have in this movie, like the journey inside the spaceship to see the various preserved bits of stuffed humans and things, which was just Yorkie. I tried to throw all sorts of handicaps in the way because I thought it was just a yucky notion. I didn't think one could ever do it successfully. That it would be silly looking and repulsive. Because this was my first studio feature, I had a limited amount of a short leash on how much I could change the screenplay. But I wrote this sequence, which they used Arnold remembered and used later on. I wrote this sequence where I wanted them to, instead of going in by helicopter, I wanted them to go in a high-low jump, which is a to go in an airplane where the back end opens up and to jump out. And I found a small version of a C-130 that could plausibly land and take off from an aircraft carrier. And the notion was that they went in over the Andes and got jumped by a Peruvian MiG, and the pilot wanted to scrub the mission because they were lost, and Arnold instead held the gun on the pilot and said, "No, we're going ahead with it now. Open a goddamn back door." And so the pilot does. He opens the back door, and the team all jumps out. And Arnold, who doesn't have a parachute on, says, "See you," to the pilot, and starts running the length of the airplane. And as he goes down the length of the airplane, he grabs a parachute off the wall and keeps running straight off the back ramp of the airplane and dives off, and he's still, the plane's flying at 200 feet or something, and he's got the parachute in his hand. Now, it turned out that they used it later. It's in Eraser, but I wrote it for Predator, and they wouldn't let me shoot it. So that relates to why there was a big worry about the budget and the spaceship, because I couldn't simply say, "Get the fucking spaceship out of the movie." I instead had to work on budget and misdirection and stuff. It's unfortunate. I have to do that. There's another one of those goofy machetes. Well, when we had the new suit, the new Predator from Stan Winston, he brought in a kid named Kevin Peter Hall. He's dead now. We knew we had to rework things the moment the original Predator came out of the box. It was clearly ridiculous. Here is the only shot where anybody got hurt in the movie. That shot right there. The guy threw his knee out. Turned out after the fact, I found out after I got back to the States that I'd broken my wrist. And that I just worked through it. Yeah, I fell out of a tree. I was too embarrassed to admit I was hurt. Here is the giant tree which we built in the gorge. This sequence here in the dusk was shot over the course of a week in order to get enough shots in actual dusk. special effect opticals. But none of these were storyboarded. This was made up out of the location. The reason you have to storyboard opticals is that optical companies always raise the price after you're in the middle. So you have all these famous cost overruns where a movie starts out to cost $40 million and before it's finished it costs 120 or some nightmare like that. So that you storyboard the effect shots. And even then you very seldom actually use them. I mean, it's a matter of documenting what is it that the effects company is supposed to do. Storyboards, I did some storyboards on the ending of the movie, part of the movie that wasn't shot. None of this stuff was. This is all Palenque later. Wasn't even written, actually. I storyboarded these things and storyboarded the various things that were missing all the way through. There, now, that's a gymnast actually swinging in a gymnasium in Los Angeles in a red suit, and then placed into a shot of the jungle. Joel Hynek was the one who was really responsible for the camouflage effect. And the main thing he had to do was come up with the repeating image within an image within an image within an image. Until they discovered that, the camouflage effect looked dreadful. It looked like a silly cutout in the film. It didn't work at all. Joel Hynek is really splendid. I've worked with him several times since, and he did the effects in Matrix. He came up with the slow motion jumping through the air stuff. When we hired Stan Winston, first thing he did is looked at all the pieces we had, all the drawings we had, and then he went to work for a week or two drawing on his own. There is our concrete tree, owned by a crew of about 50 peonies over a 2-week course. Stan went to work on his own, came up with a whole Rastafarian hairdo and the external set of jaws that the creature has. I did not want and would not have countenanced a racial suggestion as to what the predator looked like. Yes, those are sort of dreadlocks, but there was no notion that people should somehow think he seems African. I mean, everything that Stan came up with, the producers were thrilled with. It looked so much better than anything else we've had up to that point. Larry Gordon was running Fox at the time, and I had this long sort of presentation meeting where he had to go sniff me out and decide whether he wanted to trust me or something. scared the hell out of me. I'd never been through that sort of experience. In fact, he was probably, I think, at the time, the first studio head I have ever met. I mean, I've since learned that he's a goddamn sweetheart, but I didn't know that at the time. Boy, he scared me. He also had the production company. He had, from the time he started the movie, he got promoted to head of Fox. And so he was kind of in two hats. While we were doing Die Hard the following year, sort of the reverse happened. He got replaced as the head of Fox, but he was still the producer of the movie that we were working on. And so Larry kept moving offices. You'd never know where to find Larry because he started in a production company and then wound up in the head of the administrative offices. And then before you knew it, he was sent back down to his old office. I've been asked if there's a conflict of interest between a producer becoming the head of the studio or whatever, but actually, Lord, no. I mean, now that I know what it's like for the head of a studio, they're desperate to get movies that work. And it's hard to believe, really, that I've seen some guys who would do that, but most of them, they want a movie that works. They're far more concerned about that than, can they feed their own deal into something? It's just, Larry isn't like that. Larry Gordon is actually one of Hollywood's good guys. And he doesn't cheat that way. He doesn't need to. He's got real stuff and does real work. Maybe I should put it another way. Larry Gordon's one of the few people in Hollywood who could wear both hats, both be the producer and be the head of the studio. And you'd actually believe that his head of the studio hat would give his producer hat a hard time. Larry is straight enough that he would fire himself, probably. It took me a while to get this cut so that it's simply sustained and it's relatively simple. And there are shots that sustain for quite a while rather than constantly jumping back and forth. And part of what my personal desire in movies is that they actually have a geography and that they be time continuous and they have some sense of reality. And in order to do that, you can't constantly jump around with a cut. Sometimes you have to leave it alone. Sometimes you have to not call attention to the editing, because calling attention to the editing does, by definition, they put the space helmet on him so that, and the suggestion they needed to breathe something else in order to not have to operate the external jaws and all the stuff of the face, because operating the face took, 8 or 10 technicians. There's like this whole row of kids with model airplane controllers, and each one had one eyebrow muscle or something. people from the pictures of Teller and those people from that. There's Kevin Peter Hall right there. And they were disassembling the bomb, and then one of them said, "Uh-oh." And they all looked at each other like, well, goodbye. And in my dream, I started to run. As I started out the door, Edward Teller spoke up to me, and he said, "John." I said, "Yeah." He said, "You all run real good now." And I started running, and the whole dream was just trying to outrun an atom bomb that was supposed to go off in, I don't know, some certain number of seconds or minutes. And in the dream, I lived through it. And then that's where I stuck it in here. Here we have the fanfare for the common mercenary. We didn't burn a hole in anything. No, we went and found a location that had been burned. Probably 2 years before. 3 years before, something like that. And we cleaned out a few low bushes and just used it as it was. And we did a lot of, we spray painted a lot of things black. The local folk burn holes in everything much faster than, they don't need us to do it. It's a 1950s kind of thing of doing a curtain call, of letting them all be, because it's such a downer with Arnold going off on his own. I wanted to get the bunch back alive, and in like the Dirty Dozen and things, they always have the guys show up, superimposed on the sky or something as giant ghosts. And instead I just said, look, let's do it, because I came out of theater, so I just said, look, I'm going to do a curtain call. I'll just have the guys. You know where I stole this? From Robert Altman. In a movie called Brewster McCloud. And I just borrowed the same idea. It's a great gimmick. Having all the fallen heroes show up on the sky just seemed, I don't know, too fascist somehow. Too militaristically nonsensical. And instead to just lighten the whole thing up and have people smile and say hi into the camera felt. Because what I was trying to do was to sort of leave a sense of the movie that, we all had a good time making this. We hope you had a good time watching it. It's been remembered well since, and it did fine.